Imagine this, 50-0. 0-0 warriors completely surrounded. Death was certain. The Mongol horde had them trapped like rats, arrows raining down, escape routes cut off. But then something happened that nobody expected. The Mongol general leading the siege switched sides. Not just any general. This was one of Genghis Khan's most trusted commanders. A man who'd helped conquer half of Asia. A man who knew every Mongol military secret. And in that moment, with one decision, he didn't just save those 50-0 men. He signed his own death warrant in the most brutal way imaginable. Because when you betray Genghis Khan, death isn't the punishment. Death is the mercy you pray for. But here's what's absolutely insane about this story. This general, his name was Belgian. He wasn't some ambitious traitor planning a coup. He was Genghis Khan's sworn blood brother. Not a biological brother, but something even deeper in Mongol culture. A chosen brother. Belgate had personally executed over 10-0 enemies for the Kchen. He'd conquered 17 cities before his 30th birthday. His tactical brilliance was so legendary that enemy armies would surrender just hearing his name. And boy, did he enjoy that power. At his peak, Belgate commanded 80-0 of the most elite Mongol warriors. That's larger than most European armies combined. He owned 500 war horses, had 12 wives, and his personal tent required 200 men just to set up. You're probably thinking, why would someone with that much power, that much wealth, risk everything by betraying the most dangerous man in history? The answer involves a secret so dark, so personal that historians tried to erase it from the records. But recently discovered Mongolian texts reveal what really happened, and the truth, it's even more twisted than you could imagine. See, Belgate didn't just know Genghis Khan's military secrets. He knew his personal ones, the kind that could destroy an empire. And when the Khan crossed a line that even the Mongols considered unforgivable, Belgate faced an impossible choice. Loyalty to his blood brother or loyalty to something even more sacred. Welcome to the insane true story of Belgate Noyan, the only man who betrayed Genghis Khan and almost lived to tell about it. The year was 1172. The Mongolian steppes were brutal. Imagine trying to survive where temperatures dropped to -40, where tribal warfare was constant, where children learned to ride before they could walk. Belg was born into this chaos. The son of a minor tribal chief named Sashan. Now, here's where Belgate's story takes its first dark turn. When he was 7 years old, his father was poisoned at a rival tribe's feast, a common assassination method on the steppes. His mother, pregnant with another child, was taken as a slave. Belgi escaped only because he was small enough to hide under dead horses during the raid. For 3 days, this 7-year-old boy survived alone, drinking horse blood to stay alive, moving only at night. It was an early lesson for Belg that in this world, cleverness meant more than strength. You see, what saved Belg wasn't luck. It was calculation. Even as a child, he understood that survival meant making yourself useful to someone stronger. When a young warrior named Temujin found him scavenging near a destroyed camp, Belg didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he offered information. The location of the raiders, their numbers, their habits. This 7-year-old boy had been watching them, memorizing patterns, planning his revenge. Temujin was so impressed that he didn't just spare Belg. He performed the blood brother ceremony right there. They cut their palms, mixed their blood, and under Mongol tradition became closer than biological siblings. Belg would later reflect on this and say it was the moment he learned the ultimate truth. Information was the deadliest weapon of all. By the time Belgate turned 16, he'd already developed what would become his signature strategy. While other young Mongols proved themselves through single combat, Belgate proved himself through intelligence gathering. He spoke 7 languages fluently: Mongol, Chinese, Persian, Arabic, Turkic, Tangut, and Russian. But here's the crucial part. He never let anyone know he understood them all. During negotiations or prisoner interrogations, he'd pretend to need translators while secretly understanding every word. The intelligence he gathered this way was invaluable. He knew which tribes were planning attacks, which merchants were smuggling weapons, which generals could be bribed. Using these new connections, Belg built something unprecedented in Mongol society, a network of informants that stretched from China to Persia. He was just 19 years old, and already he knew more secrets than men, 3 times his age. When the Mongol tribes united in 1206, Belgate had a choice. He could compete with other generals for military glory, or he could create his own unique position of power. But Belgate saw an opportunity here that others missed. He convinced the newly crowned Genghis Khan that traditional warfare was wasteful. Why lose thousands of warriors in battle when you could defeat enemies through fear, deception, and psychological warfare? It was such an incredibly simple move, but it was the meticulous planning that made it possible. Belgate proposed something revolutionary. The world's first organized military intelligence unit with him as its commander. The first test came with the invasion of the Shisha kingdom in 129. Other generals wanted to assault the capital directly. Belgate had a different plan. His spies had discovered that the Shisha king was deeply superstitious. So Belgate orchestrated what might be history's greatest psychological operation. He had agents spread prophecies about a divine punishment coming from the north. Dead birds were planted near temples painted with mysterious symbols. Wells were contaminated with substances that turned water red like blood. Within weeks, panic gripped the city. When the Mongol armies finally appeared, the defenders were already psychologically defeated. The city surrendered without a single Mongol death. Genghis Khan was so impressed that he gave Belg complete autonomy over intelligence operations. But here's what nobody realized. Belg wasn't just gathering intelligence on enemies. Every Mongol general, every administrator, even Genghis Khan's own family members were being watched and documented. You might wonder why Belgate would spy on his own people. The answer reveals his true genius. He understood that in an empire built on conquest, today's ally could be tomorrow's rival. Information wasn't just power, it was insurance. By 1215, Belgate had dirt on everyone who mattered. The general who skimmed gold from conquests. The administrator who sold military supplies to enemies. The Khan's son who had unusual tastes, all documented, all verified, all hidden in locations only Belgate knew. By 1219, Belgium commanded something more powerful than any army. He commanded truth itself. Every piece of intelligence in the Mongol Empire passed through his network first. Think about that for a second. When Genghis Khan asked, "How many enemies are we facing?" Belg decided the answer. When generals reported victories, Belg verified them. When cities offered tribute, Belgate counted it. He was literally controlling what the most powerful man in the world believed was real, and Belgate was very carefully editing that reality. Here's a perfect example of his manipulation. The city of Atrar had executed Mongol merchants, triggering war with the Khwarezm Empire. What history books don't tell you is that Belgate knew about the threat weeks before it happened. His spies had reported. Tensions warned of possible violence, but Belg let it happen. Why? because war with Khwarezm would make him indispensable, and he was right. The campaign that followed showcased Belg at his most brilliant and most terrifying. He had spent 3 years placing agents throughout the Khwarezm Empire, not just spies, but people in positions of actual power. The Shah's personal physician was Belg's man. 2 of his generals were being blackmailed. His favorite concubine was sending reports. When the invasion began, the Shah's own people were working against him. But here's the crucial part that reveals Belgut's true nature. After each city fell, the official reports would list treasure captured, but Belgut's private ledgers discovered years later show different numbers. Millions in gold and silver simply vanished between the battlefield and the Khan's treasury. Belg had created an entire shadow economy. He was paying informants, bribing officials, yes, but he was also building something else, a power base independent of Genghis Khan. He now controlled private armies disguised as intelligence-gathering units, nearly 15,000 men loyal only to him. He owned property in dozens of cities under false names. Historical estimates suggest he had accumulated wealth equivalent to $100 million in today's money. Belgian wasn't just serving an empire anymore. He was building his own. Power revealed something dark in Belg, something even he probably didn't expect. The problem was Belg had started believing he was smarter than everyone else. And honestly, he probably was. But intelligence without wisdom is dangerous. He began taking risks that made no sense except as displays of his own untouchability. He would openly contradict other generals in war councils, knowing they couldn't challenge him without their secrets being exposed. He took women from conquered cities that were promised to other commanders. But the incident that began his downfall seemed minor at the time. A Chinese merchant named Wayan had been caught smuggling information to Song dynasty spies. Under Mongol law, he should have been executed immediately, but Belgut protected him. Why? Because Wayan was one of his primary financial handlers managing his hidden wealth. When other generals questioned this mercy, Belgut simply said the merchant was too valuable as an informant. Nobody could prove otherwise, but back in Karakorum, people were starting to ask questions. How did Belg always have gold for bribes when the treasury was empty? Why did his intelligence its look more like private armies? And most suspiciously, why did enemies always seem to know when Genghis Khan was traveling, but never when Belg was? The breaking point came in the winter of 1221. This is where the story gets truly dark. A Khwarezm princess named Gulnar had been captured and was being held for ransom. She was under Genghis Khan's personal protection, meaning anyone who touched her would face death by 1,000 cuts. But Gulnar made a mistake. She recognized one of Belgut's spies from her father's court and threatened to expose him. What happened next depends on which account you believe. Official records say she killed herself, but 3 different witnesses later testified they saw Belgut leave her tent that night, and when her body was found, she was pregnant. Implications were catastrophic. If Belgut had violated a woman under the Khan's protection, it wasn't just a crime. It was treason of the highest order. Then in March 1222, everything unraveled in the most unexpected way. A dying enemy general named Jalal ad-Din, trying to bargain for his son's life, revealed something that shook the Mongol leadership to its core. He had documents authenticated with Belgut's personal seal proposing an alliance. Not just any alliance, but a detailed plan to partition the Mongol Empire. Belgut would provide intelligence on Mongol movements, create false reports to misdirect armies, and when Genghis Khan was isolated, enemy forces would strike. In exchange, Belg would rule everything west of Samarkand as an independent king. For Belgut, as these documents started circulating among the Mongol leadership, he must have known his carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing. But here's where Belgut proved he was still the most dangerous man in Empire. He sent a single message to Genghis Khan: "Meet me alone or everything burns." He wasn't threatening physical violence. He was threatening to release every secret he'd collected. The affairs, the murders, the covered-up defeats, but most explosively, documents suggesting that Yoshi, Genghis Khan's eldest son and heir, might not be his biological child. If this information became public, the succession would collapse, the empire would face civil war. What happened at that meeting remains history's greatest mystery. They met in a gur outside the main camp, completely alone for 6 hours. No guards, no witnesses. When Genghis Khan emerged, witnesses say he looked aged by years. Belgate emerged smiling. The deal they struck was unprecedented in Mongol justice. Belg would leave immediately, go into exile, and never return. In exchange, his intelligence network would be absorbed intact. His secrets would remain buried, and officially, he would simply disappear on a mission. He was given a horse, supplies, and 7 days' head start. For a man who had betrayed Genghis Khan, it was impossibly merciful, but mercy has limits even for blood brothers. As for Belg, he made it. Exactly 43 days. Mongol hunters, not soldiers, hunters, tracked him to the shores of the Caspian Sea. The execution method told the whole story. He was wrapped in a white carpet and trampled by horses until dead. In Mongol tradition, this method was reserved for royalty. It prevented royal blood from touching the earth. Even in ordering his death, Genghis Khan was acknowledging what Belgate had been to him, a brother and equal, a threat that could never be allowed to survive. The purge that followed was thorough and brutal. Over 3,000 people connected to Belg's network were executed. But here's what's really interesting. Many of his methods survived. The Mongol Empire never again allowed one person to control all intelligence. They created competing networks, multiple verification systems, checks and balances that modern intelligence agencies still study today. Ultimately, though, the people who suffered most were the ordinary soldiers and civilians. Without Belgate's psychological warfare tactics, Mongol conquests became purely brutal affairs. Cities that might have surrendered after clever deception were instead destroyed completely. The death toll of Mongol conquests actually increased by an estimated 40% after Belgate's death. What is clear is this story was an example of how information can be more dangerous than any weapon. Reports suggest that, towards the end, Belgate had gone from a brilliant survivor who used intelligence to save lives to a paranoid puppet master who trusted no one and was trusted by none. Modern intelligence agencies still study the Belg paradox. When someone knows too much, they become too dangerous to exist, even to their allies. The boy who learned at age 7 that information meant survival died at 30 because he knew too much to be allowed to live. Now, whilst the story of Belg is pretty terrifying, I still wouldn't call him the most ruthless Mongol warrior in history. For that, you're going to want to check out the absolutely insane story of Subutai, the commoner who became Genghis Khan's greatest general, conquered 32 nations, and never lost a single battle. This guy made Belgate look like amateur. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!